Here's something almost nobody tells you about intelligence. It has nothing to do with your grades, nothing to do with your IQ score, nothing to do with how fast you talk in meetings or how many books you've read this year. The realest measure of your mind shows up in a place you'd never think to look. Not in a classroom, not on a resume, not in a group chat. It shows up when you're completely, totally alone. And here's the strange part. Most of the behaviors I'm about to describe look, from the outside, like nothing at all. They look like silence. They look like a person doing nothing. But underneath that silence, something rare is happening. Something most people never let themselves experience. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly where you stand. Because if you catch yourself doing even 3 or 4 of these 7 things, on purpose, without anyone telling you to, your mind is operating on a different frequency than you've ever been given credit for. But it's number 7 that changes how you'll see your entire life. So don't leave early. Picture this. It's 9 p.m. on a weeknight. Everyone you know is either out somewhere, or scrolling, or half watching something with the volume too low to really hear it. And you? You're sitting in a room by yourself, and you're not bored. You're not lonely. You're just there, present, thinking, and some small nagging voice asks the question it always asks in moments like this. Is something wrong with me? Here's what I need you to understand before we go any further. That voice is not telling you the truth. It's an inherited voice, planted by a culture that equates being alone with being broken, and being surrounded with being fine. But psychology tells a very different story. And once you hear it, you'll never look at your own quiet evenings the same way again. Let's start with number 1, and I promise, it gets more revealing from here. Number 1, you rehearse conversations that haven't happened yet. You know this one. You're driving or showering or lying in bed, and suddenly you're mid-conversation with someone who isn't there, explaining yourself, defending a decision, saying the perfect thing you didn't get to say earlier. Most people think this is just overthinking, a bad habit, something to be embarrassed about. It isn't. Psychologists call this anticipatory cognitive rehearsal, and it's one of the clearest markers of a highly simulating mind. A brain that doesn't just react to the world, but models it in advance. You're not wasting time. You're running simulations, testing outcomes before they happen, preparing for versions of reality that haven't occurred yet, so that when they do, you're not caught off guard. The people who do this constantly tend to be the same people who stay calm in real confrontations. Because in some sense, they've already had the conversation a dozen times before it happened once. But here's where it gets interesting. This habit is closely tied to something even rarer. Something most people have never even heard of. And it's number 2. Number 2. You can sit with an unfinished thought without rushing to close it. Most minds hate an open loop. The second a thought feels unresolved, the brain scrambles to slam it shut. With a quick answer, a distraction, anything to make the discomfort go away. You don't do that. Or at least, not always. You'll be alone with an idea, something that doesn't fully make sense yet, and instead of forcing a conclusion, you let it sit there. Unfinished, open, for hours, sometimes days. This is called tolerance for cognitive ambiguity, and researchers have found something fascinating about people who have it. They consistently outperform others at complex problem solving. Not because they're faster, because they're willing to stay confused for longer than everyone else is comfortable with. Impatient minds grab the first answer that shows up. Yours waits for the right one. And this pattern connects directly into something even more telling. Something that happens in the quietest, most easily missed moments of your day. Number 3 is where most people completely lose me, because they've never noticed themselves doing it. Number 3, you talk to yourself, out loud when no one is around. Muttering while you cook, narrating while you clean, quietly working through a problem under your breath, like there's someone else in the room, even though there isn't. If you've ever caught yourself doing this and felt a flash of embarrassment, stop. What you're doing has a name, and it's not a red flag. It's called self-directed private speech, and it's one of the strongest predictors of strong executive function that psychology has ever measured. Talking to yourself out loud activates a different part of your cognition than silent thinking does. It slows your reasoning down just enough to catch errors your inner monologue would have skipped right past. Children do it constantly while they're learning to think, and then, in most people, it fades. But in some minds, it never fully disappears. It just becomes private. If you still do this as an adult, alone, without shame, it usually means your brain never stopped using one of its most efficient tools. Now, that one might feel small, but wait until you hear number 4, because this next one is the exact opposite of what most people assume intelligent people do. It's almost the reverse. Number 4, you delay reacting even when you're alone. Here's the part everyone gets wrong. They assume that being alone means being unfiltered, that when nobody's watching, you finally let it all out. Anger, frustration, whatever you're really feeling. But if you're one of these rare minds, something different happens. Something gets hurt, or something goes wrong, and instead of immediately reacting, you pause. Even alone. Even when there's genuinely no one to perform for. You give the feeling a few seconds, sometimes a few minutes. You let the first wave pass before you decide what it actually means. This is called reflective emotional latency, and it's one of the rarest self-regulation traits psychologists study because it can't be faked in front of others. It only shows up when nobody's around to see it. That's what makes it real. You're not managing your reaction for an audience. You're managing it because some part of you has learned that the first response is rarely the true one. And this trait quietly builds towards something much bigger, something that determines almost every major decision you'll ever make. Which brings us to number 5, and honestly, this is where things start to get personal. Number 5, you change your own mind, privately, without telling anyone. Most people's beliefs are public performances. They form an opinion, announce it, and then, because changing your mind in public feels like losing, they defend it long after they've stopped actually believing it. You do something different, alone, quietly, with no audience and no stakes. You'll realize you were wrong about something, and you'll just update. No announcement, no dramatic reversal. You simply start thinking the new way, as if the old belief was never that important to defend in the first place. Psychologists call this low ego investment in belief, and it's shockingly uncommon. Most people's identity gets fused to their opinions. Changing the opinion feels like changing who they are. But your beliefs and your identity aren't the same thing, which means you can revise the map without losing the territory. This single trait is one of the strongest predictors of long-term wisdom, because wise people aren't the ones who are right the most. They're the ones who update the fastest. Now, number 6 is where this whole video starts pointing somewhere you didn't expect. Stay with me. Number 6. You feel most like yourself in complete silence. Not bored, not itching for your phone, not counting the minutes until something happens. Actually fully yourself. The version of you that shows up in true silence, no music, no notifications, no conversation, is somehow more you than the version that shows up around other people. This one is deceptively simple, but it might be the most important marker on this entire list. Psychologists studying what's called authenticity under Solitude have found that most people's sense of self is actually socially constructed, pieced together in real time based on who's around them. Take the audience away, and there's a strange emptiness underneath. But some people have built a self that doesn't need an audience to exist. When the noise disappears, they don't disappear with it. If anything, they come into focus. If silence feels like home to you rather than something to escape, that's not a small detail. That's the foundation everything else on this list has been quietly building toward. And that brings us to the final one, number 7. This is the one that ties every single previous point together, and it's also the one most people get completely backwards. Number 7. You prepare for things that might never happen. You've thought about it. The conversation you might need to have someday, the plan you might need if things go sideways, the version of your life that only exists as a contingency, sitting quietly in the back of your mind, just in case. Most people call this anxiety. Sometimes it is, but there's another version of this, a calmer, more deliberate version that psychologists call proactive cognitive preparedness. It's the difference between fear driving you to imagine worst-case scenarios and a settled mind simply thinking 2 steps ahead because that's how it naturally operates. If you do this without spiraling, if you can think through what might happen and then set it down again, calmly, without it consuming you, you're doing something that separates reactive minds from strategic ones. You're not scared of the future. You're just already a little bit inside it, watching before it arrives. And here's what almost nobody realizes. Every single trait on this list, the rehearsing, the sitting with ambiguity, the private speech, the delayed reactions, the quiet belief updating, the comfort in silence, all of it feeds directly into this final one. Each one is a small piece of the same architecture. A mind that thinks ahead of the moment it's actually in. That's not overthinking. That's not anxiety. That's not being weird. That is one of the rarest and most underappreciated forms of intelligence that exists. And almost nobody will ever tell you that, because from the outside, it just looks like a person, alone, in a quiet room, doing nothing. Here's what I want you to sit with. None of these 7 things will ever show up on a resume. No one will ever congratulate you for doing them. There's no trophy for rehearsing a conversation in the shower, or updating a belief no one even knew you held. But add them up, all 7 quietly repeated over years, and you get something that can't be taught in school and can't be faked in an interview. A mind that thinks for itself, checks itself, and doesn't need anyone else in the room to function at its best. If you counted 3, 4, 5 of these in yourself while watching this, I want you to really let that land. You're not strange, you're not antisocial, you're not too in your head. You're operating with a kind of intelligence that's genuinely rare, not because it's flashy, but because almost nobody has the patience to develop it. It only grows in silence. It only shows up when no one's watching. And most people never sit still long enough to find out they even have it. If this described you, tell me which number hit hardest. I read every comment. And if you know someone who's been quietly misunderstood for liking their own company a little too much, send them this video. They might finally understand what their silence has actually been building all along. I'll see you in the next one.